The math around the silos has always bothered me. We were told there were 50. Then Bernard corrected that number. There were 51. And now, after everything Season 3 has shown us, that little correction looks much more deliberate than it did when we first heard it. Because we have finally seen the silo complex, and there is a problem. You can count them. There are 50. That includes Silo 1. So, where is Silo 51? The obvious answer would be that we simply missed one. Maybe the camera angle hides it. Maybe one structure sits outside the main pattern. Maybe the numbering doesn't match the physical layout. But Season 3 has made this harder to dismiss. The show has now taken us back to the origin of the project, showing Daniel and Helen discovering that the silos were being planned and constructed before the catastrophe. Episode 7 gave us the first major look at the construction site, while Episode 8 went even further and explained that Stensen's project involved 50 underground silos designed to preserve humanity against an existential technological threat. And that wording matters. Because if the project was built around 50 silos, why has Bernard's number been 51? That is the question I think we should be asking now. There are actually two separate mysteries hiding inside this. The first is physical. Where is the missing structure? The second is much more interesting. Why would the show make sure we knew there was a 51st silo if that silo wasn't important? And I don't think the answer is simply the writers made a counting mistake. There have been multiple fan discussions since the Season 3 material started showing the silo field. People have counted the structures and repeatedly arrived at 50, including Silo 1. That's too specific to ignore, especially because the dialogue gave us a different number. And there is another detail that makes this even stranger. The central structure in the layout is Silo 1. We already know Silo 1 is different. It isn't simply another isolated community like Silo 18 or Silo 17. It has a special relationship with the system that governs the other silos. Season 2 established that there was an authority capable of monitoring what happened across the silo network, and Season 3 has continued expanding that idea. So perhaps we've been making one assumption that the show wants us to question. Maybe the 51st silo isn't missing from the picture. Maybe it isn't part of the picture. Think about what we have learned in the Before Time storyline. Stensen's project was designed around preserving humanity. The people involved weren't simply digging random holes in the ground. There was a plan. There were systems. There was selection. There was information control. And by Episode 8, the explanation had become even more specific. The silos were intended to preserve people and knowledge from a catastrophic threat involving advanced nanotechnology. That makes the number 51 more suspicious, because the difference between 50 and 51 may tell us something about the architecture of the entire system. There is one theory that has been floating around since Season 2. Silo 1 could be the extra. In other words, there could be 50 population silos plus Silo 1 as a separate command or control facility. That would give us 51 total structures in the broader network while still allowing the physical map of the population silos to contain only 50. But there's a problem with that explanation. Silo 1 is already visibly included in the count. When people count the structures in the Season 3 layout, the central Silo 1 is one of the 50. So, calling Silo 1 the missing 51st doesn't solve the visual discrepancy. It creates a different one. Unless the phrase 51 silos means something other than 51 identical underground communities. And that possibility gets much more interesting when you remember how the show handles information. The people inside Silo 18 don't have the complete picture. Even Bernard doesn't. He knows more than almost everyone around him, but he still operates inside a system whose rules were established long before he was alive. Season 3 has been slowly moving us toward the people who created those rules. And Episode 8 gave us another important clue. Daniel and Helen are shown the project while it is still being built. They are given an opportunity to become part of it. Daniel is offered work connected to the construction and logistics, while Helen is offered a role involving information. They refuse Stensen's offer. That pairing is worth paying attention to. Construction, information, those are two sides of the same project. The silos needed to be physically built, but the people inside them also needed to be controlled through information. And once you accept that, the possibility of a separate 51st facility becomes much more plausible. Because a system containing 50 isolated populations would need some way to coordinate them. Something has to monitor them. Something has to maintain the rules. Something has to know when a silo has failed. And something has to decide what happens next. We've already seen evidence that information can move between silos. We've seen evidence that the system knows what is happening inside them. We've seen the importance of Silo 1. We've seen Bernard behaving as though forces outside Silo 18 have consequences for him. And we've now seen that the entire network was designed intentionally. So what if the number 51 refers to the network rather than the visible field? That would explain why the map keeps giving us 50 physical structures while the dialogue insists on 51. But there's another possibility, and this one would make the mystery much bigger. The 51st could be somewhere else entirely. If the 50 structures we can see are the actual population silos, then the missing one could have a completely different purpose. Maybe it was never designed to look like the others. Maybe it wasn't built for thousands of ordinary residents. Maybe it was built for the people running the experiment. We have to be careful here because the show has not confirmed this, but the current evidence gives the theory something it didn't have before. Season 3 has shown that the Silo Project began as a controlled preservation program. The people behind it knew the outside world was facing an extraordinary threat. They were deciding what humanity would look like after that threat, and they were building systems capable of controlling that future. That raises an uncomfortable question. Who was supposed to control the people inside? Because 50 isolated populations don't automatically create a functioning system. You need coordination, you need oversight, you need communication. And if the population inside each silo was supposed to believe that its own silo was the entire world, then whoever controlled the information connecting the silos would have an enormous advantage. That brings us back to Silo 1. Maybe the mistake is assuming Silo 1 is simply another silo with a different number. Its role has always looked different. The show has repeatedly associated it with the administration of the larger system. And the Season 3 story has been pushing us toward the people and technology behind that system. So perhaps the real structure is 50 silos plus an external control system that was later referred to as the 51st. Or perhaps there really was a physical 51st structure, but it was built differently and deliberately separated from the others. There is even a more speculative possibility. The 51st silo may have been removed. Think about the reason the silos exist in the first place. The project was designed to preserve humanity through a disaster. That means the architects would have had to think about failure. What happens if one silo becomes unstable? What happens if its population revolts? What happens if its resources fail? What happens if its leaders discover the truth? Season 3 has shown us that these aren't hypothetical concerns. Silo 17 already demonstrated what happens when a rebellion destroys the existing order. Silo 18 is now dealing with its own rebellion, while the safeguard system threatens the population on a much larger scale. Episode 8 also revealed more about the mechanism that allowed Silo 17 survivors to endure. The architects clearly expected failure. So a separate facility could have been designed as a backup. Maybe Silo 51 was never intended to house an ordinary population. Maybe it was the place where the project could be restarted, or perhaps it was supposed to be the final refuge for the people who built the system. That would give the number 51 a very different meaning. And there's another detail from the current theory landscape worth considering. Some fans have tried to connect the 51 silos to the 50 American states plus Washington, D.C. The theory is that each silo corresponds to a state, with the extra one representing the federal capital. There are even attempts to connect Silo 18 with Louisiana and objects from the before time storyline to that numbering system. It's an interesting pattern, but I wouldn't treat it as established. The show has given us enough material to investigate the number 51, but it hasn't confirmed that the silos correspond to the states. And there are immediate problems with that idea anyway. The numbering doesn't cleanly establish the geographic or historical relationship fans are proposing. So for me, the more useful part of that theory is the basic observation. The number 51 may have been chosen for a reason. The writers could have simply had Bernard say 50. They didn't. He corrected it. That correction became part of the show's mythology. Then Season 3 showed us a visual layout that appears to contain only 50. That's the kind of contradiction Silo loves. The show constantly gives us information that seems complete until another detail makes it incomplete. And now we have a very clean possibility. The 50 structures we can see may be the visible part of the system. The 51st may be the part we're still not supposed to see. There is also a reason I don't think the answer will simply be the CGI team forgot one. The production has gone out of its way to show us the layout. Season 3's Before Time storyline needed to establish the scale of the project. We saw the construction site. We saw the people behind it. We saw the physical machinery required to create this underground network. The entire point of those scenes was to show that the silos were planned, engineered, and organized before the disaster. A visual count becoming a fan mystery was almost inevitable. And with only 2 episodes remaining after episode 8, the timing is perfect. Because season 3 has already started answering the question of why the silos were built. Now the remaining question becomes how the system was organized. Who controlled it? How did the silos communicate? Why was Silo 1 different? And where does that extra number come from? We should also remember that Season 4 is confirmed as the final season, meaning the show has limited room left to leave major structural mysteries hanging. The creators have indicated that the remaining seasons will resolve the major questions surrounding the silos and their purpose. So I think Silo 51 is worth watching closely. My current guess is that the number 51 refers to something functionally different from the 50 structures we can count on the surface map. The strongest candidate is a separate control, administrative, or coordination facility connected to Silo 1 and the wider system. But there is another possibility I like even more. The missing silo may not be missing at all. We may simply be looking at the wrong map. The image we've seen could represent the physical cluster of the main silos, while the 51st exists somewhere outside that arrangement, hidden because its purpose is different. And if that turns out to be true, the number 51 could become one of the biggest clues we've been given about who was actually in charge. Because the people inside Silo 18 thought they were trapped underground. The truth may be that someone, somewhere, was still watching the entire network. And if there really is a Silo 51, the most important question won't be where it is. It will be who is allowed to live there.